My hands tremble as I write this, hoping to make sense of the nightmare that unfolded in our high school last October. It's hard to believe that something so sinister could happen in a place we all thought was safe. But the darkness crept in, and now I can't escape the haunting memories. It started with the whispers, the subtle hints of something wrong. Our school, Jefferson High, had always been just another sleepy town school where nothing exciting ever happened. But that year, things were different. It began with the rumors about the old janitor, Mr. Harris. He'd been working at the school for decades, a quiet man who kept to himself. Some said he was hiding a dark past, that he'd done terrible things before coming to our town. Most of us dismissed it as gossip, just the usual nonsense that gets passed around in a small community. But then, strange things started happening. It was little things at first: textbooks disappearing from lockers, lights flickering ominously in empty classrooms, cold drafts in the hallways where there shouldn't have been any. The teachers brushed it off as electrical issues, but we knew better. The tension was palpable, an unseen force pressing down on us, making every creak and groan of the old building feel like a warning. The turning point came on a chilly Friday evening. It was the night of the annual fall dance, and everyone was excited. The gym was decorated with orange and black streamers, fake cobwebs, and carved pumpkins. I was there with my friends, trying to enjoy the night despite the uneasy feeling that had been gnawing at me for weeks. As the night went on, the power suddenly went out, plunging the gym into darkness. The emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the room. Panic set in, and people started murmuring nervously. Then, a loud crash echoed from somewhere in the building, followed by a blood-curdling scream. We all froze, the sound chilling us to the bone. A group of us, including my best friend Lily and our classmate Jake, decided to investigate. We made our way through the darkened hallways, our flashlights barely cutting through the oppressive gloom. The school felt different at night, the familiar corridors twisted into something out of a nightmare. We followed the sound of muffled cries to the basement, a place we rarely ventured. The air grew colder as we descended the stairs, and the smell of dampness and decay hit us. At the end of the hallway, we found an old storage room with its door slightly ajar. The sound was coming from inside. I pushed the door open, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was cluttered with old furniture and forgotten supplies, but in the center of the floor was something far more horrifying. Mr. Harris was there, his face contorted in a grotesque mask of pain and terror. His eyes were wide open, staring at something none of us could see. He was tied to a chair, and it looked like he'd been there for days. Before we could react, the door slammed shut behind us, and the temperature dropped even further. Our breath misted in the frigid air. A low, guttural voice whispered from the shadows, saying things we couldn't understand. The lights of our flashlights flickered and died, leaving us in complete darkness. Panic set in. We banged on the door, screaming for help, but it felt like the walls were closing in on us. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel something cold and slimy brush against my arm. I screamed, stumbling backward into Lily. She grabbed my hand, her grip like a vice. Then, out of nowhere, a bright light filled the room. It was Principal Thompson, his face pale but determined. He shouted something I couldn't make out, and the whispering stopped abruptly. The door flew open, and we scrambled out, desperate to escape whatever horror lurked in that basement. The police were called, and they cordoned off the area. They found Mr. Harris, but it was too late. He was dead, his body a twisted testament to the terror he must have endured. They never did find out what really happened, and the official report ruled it as a tragic accident. But we knew better. The school was closed for a week, and when we returned, things were different. The hallways felt darker, the classrooms colder. The whispers continued, now more pronounced, more menacing. Some students transferred out, unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere. Others, like me, stayed, haunted by the knowledge of what we'd seen. Lily and I drifted apart after that night, the shared trauma too much for our friendship to bear. I still see her sometimes, but we don't talk about what happened. It's like a silent agreement, a way to keep the darkness at bay. Even now, I can't walk past the basement without feeling a shiver run down my spine. The storage room is locked, sealed off from the rest of the school, but I know it's still there, waiting. The whispers have grown quieter over the months, but they haven't disappeared completely. Sometimes, late at night, I hear them calling my name, beckoning me to return to that place of horror. I've tried to move on, to focus on my studies and pretend that everything is normal. But the truth is, Jefferson High will never be the same, and neither will I. I can barely believe what happened last week. My hands still shake when I think about it. Everyone thinks it's just another urban legend, but I know what I saw. This isn't some story made up to scare freshmen. It's real, and it happened right here at Ridgewood High. It started with the disappearance of Jessica Matthews. Jessica was popular, the kind of girl everyone knew and most wanted to be friends with. When she didn't show up for school, no one thought much of it. Maybe she was sick or just skipping. But then one day turned into 2, and then a week. Her parents were frantic, the police were involved, and everyone at school was on edge. A few days after Jessica went missing, strange things started happening. It was subtle at first, books falling off shelves, lockers opening on their own, that sort of thing. Most of us thought it was just our minds playing tricks on us, or maybe someone trying to mess with us because of what had happened. But the real terror began when the messages appeared. It was a Thursday afternoon when I first saw one. I was in the library, trying to concentrate on my chemistry homework, when I noticed something odd about the computer screen in front of me. The monitor flickered, and then a single line of text appeared: "Find her." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Was this some kind of sick joke? I glanced around, but the library was nearly empty. The few students who were there were absorbed in their own work, oblivious to what I was seeing. I tried to dismiss it, thinking it was a glitch or some prank. But then, the same message started appearing everywhere. In the bathrooms, scrawled on the mirrors in what looked like red lipstick. On the blackboards in classrooms, written in chalk when no one was watching. Even on my phone, a text message from an unknown number that simply read, "Find her." By the next day, everyone was talking about it. Some people thought it was Jessica herself, trying to reach out to us from wherever she was. Others believed it was someone trying to keep her disappearance fresh in our minds. But the fear in the air was palpable. That night, I had a dream about Jessica. She was standing in the hallway at school, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. She reached out to me, her mouth moving silently as if she were trying to tell me something. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat. The image of her haunted eyes burned into my memory. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to do something. I found myself wandering the halls after school, searching for, I didn't know what. Clues? Answers? I ended up in the old, abandoned part of the building. It was supposed to be off limits, but the lock on the door was broken, and curiosity got the better of me. The air was thick with dust and the smell of mildew. I wandered through the darkened corridors, the only light coming from the small flashlight on my phone. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the ancient pipes made my heart race. But I felt like I was being drawn somewhere, like something was pulling me deeper into the bowels of the school. I turned a corner and found myself in front of an old janitor's closet. The door was slightly ajar, and inside I could see a faint light. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small and cluttered with cleaning supplies, but what caught my eye was a piece of paper lying on the floor. It was a page from Jessica's notebook, her name scrawled in the corner in her familiar handwriting. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The paper was stained and crumpled, but I could make out some of the words. It was a note she'd written, a diary entry from the day before she disappeared. It talked about someone following her, about how she felt like she was being watched. My heart pounded in my chest as I read her words. She had been terrified, and no one had believed her. I stuffed the note into my pocket and turned to leave, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The light on my phone flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but the thick walls of the old building muffled my cries. As I stood there, the air grew colder, and I could hear a faint whispering like the sound of distant voices. The whispers grew louder, filling my ears with a cacophony of sounds I couldn't understand. And then I saw her. Jessica, standing in the corner of the room, her eyes wide and filled with fear. She reached out to me, her mouth moving as if she were trying to speak, but no sound came out. She looked exactly as she had in my dream, and I knew with a sickening certainty that I wasn't imagining this. I backed away, my hands scrabbling for the doorknob. Finally, it gave way, and I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. When I turned back, the door was closed, the faint light from inside gone. I ran all the way home, my mind racing. The note was still in my pocket, the only proof that what I'd seen was real. I showed it to the police, but they dismissed it as a prank, another cruel joke in the wake of Jessica's disappearance. But I know the truth. Jessica's still out there somewhere, trying to reach out to us. And whoever or whatever took her is still lurking in the shadows of Ridgewood High. I don't know if we'll ever find her, but I can't shake the feeling that she's watching, waiting for someone to uncover the secrets hidden within our school's walls. I've always hated the sound of the wind howling at night. It used to seem eerie but harmless. Now, every gust reminds me of that night in the old science lab, the night I'll never forget. It all started with a dare. My friends and I, being typical bored high school seniors, were looking for some excitement. Someone suggested we break into the old, abandoned part of the school. The administration had sealed it off years ago after a tragic accident in the science lab. No one knew exactly what happened, but the rumors were enough to scare most people away. Most people, but not us. There were 5 of us: me, Jake, Lisa, Matt, and Emma. We decided to sneak in on a Friday night. The plan was simple: get in, explore a bit, take some pictures for proof, and get out. We brought flashlights, our phones, and a couple of crowbars just in case we needed to pry open any stubborn doors. Breaking in was easier than we expected. The locks were old and rusty, barely holding together. As we stepped inside, the musty smell of decay and disuse hit us. The air was cold, much colder than it should have been for that time of year. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off, telling myself it was just nerves. The hallways were dark and silent, our footsteps echoing off the walls. We moved quickly, trying to stay quiet. Our goal was the science lab, the place where the accident had supposedly occurred. It was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a long, narrow corridor. As we made our way there, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, like something was watching us. When we finally reached the lab, the door was locked, but Matt made quick work of it with the crowbar. The door creaked open, revealing a room frozen in time. Dust covered the desks and equipment, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. The smell of chemicals still lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable. We spread out, examining the room with our flashlights. Jake and Emma were joking around, trying to lighten the mood, but I could tell they were just as uneasy as I was. Lisa found an old notebook on one of the desks, its pages yellowed and brittle. She flipped through it and her face paled. "Guys, look at this," she whispered, her voice trembling. We gathered around her, peering at the notebook. It was a lab journal, filled with notes and diagrams. The entries started off normal, detailing experiments and observations. But as we read further, the notes became more frantic, the handwriting erratic. The final entries spoke of strange occurrences, lights flickering, objects moving on their own, and a growing sense of dread. "This is creepy," Emma said, her bravado fading. "Maybe we should go." But before we could decide what to do, the temperature in the room plummeted. Our breath turned to mist, and an unnatural silence fell over us. Then we heard it, a faint whispering, like voices carried on the wind. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "What the hell is that?" Jake muttered, his eyes wide with fear. We backed away from the center of the room, our flashlights darting around searching for the source of the sound. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were almost deafening. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow detached itself from the wall, taking on a vaguely human shape. It hovered in the air, its form shifting and writhing. The whispers turned into a low, guttural growl, and the shadow moved toward us, its presence radiating malevolence. "Run!" I shouted, my voice breaking through the paralysis that had gripped us. We bolted for the door, but it slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. We pounded on it, screaming for help, but the old building absorbed our cries. The shadow advanced, its form growing darker, more solid. It reached out with tendrils of darkness, and I felt a cold so intense it burned. Lisa screamed, her flashlight clattering to the floor as she was pulled backward by an invisible force. We grabbed her, pulling with all our strength, but the shadow was stronger. It lifted her off the ground, her eyes wide with terror. "Let her go!" Matt yelled, swinging the crowbar at the shadow. It passed through the dark form without effect, but the distraction was enough. Lisa fell to the floor, gasping for breath. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. With a collective effort, we forced the door open and stumbled into the hallway. We ran, not looking back, the whispers and growls following us, echoing through the dark corridors. We burst out of the building, the night air cold and biting. We didn't stop running until we were far away, our lungs burning and our hearts pounding. When we finally stopped, we were too shaken to speak. We just stood there, staring at each other, the reality of what we'd experienced sinking in. We never went back to the old building. The school tried to cover up what happened, dismissing our story as a prank gone wrong. But we knew the truth. Something dark and malevolent lurked in that abandoned lab, something that had been awakened by our presence. Lisa transferred to another school shortly after. The rest of us tried to move on, but we were never the same. The nightmares still haunt me, the memory of that shadowy figure and the whispers in the dark. And every time the wind howls at night, I remember that cold, malevolent presence, and I know that some things are better left undisturbed.